Let's start our discussion by talking about the beautiful Amazon rainforest. So here's a picture of what it looks like. You can tell from this image that there is a large variety of different plants, and if we were to peer deeper into the rainforest, we'd see an incredible number of birds, mammals, insects, fungi, and even more. Now, if someone asked me about the Amazon rainforest, the first word that pops into my head is biodiverse. Not only is it the single largest rainforest in the entire world, it is home to over 3 million species, and the Amazon rainforest accounts for at least 10% of the world's biodiversity. Now, what do we mean by this word biodiversity? Well, biodiversity, as you might have guessed, comes from two words, biological and diversity. Essentially, it's the variations or diversity present between living beings at all levels, big and small. Since biodiversity encompasses variations on both big and small scales, we can categorize biodiversity into three different levels: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. So when we say genetic biodiversity, we're referring to the genetic variation within a population or between populations. So for example, let's take a look at a population of fish in a coral reef. So some of the fish present in this population may be blue-colored, so let me draw some blue fish, while others are green-colored. And even though all of the fish belong to the same species, their genetic biodiversity creates a population with different traits. Genetic diversity is important because it allows natural selection to act on populations and cause them to adapt to environmental conditions. So if, for instance, the coral reef suddenly experiences a huge increase in green-colored algae, the green-colored fish may camouflage better than blue-colored fish, thus leading the green-colored fish to be favored over blue-colored fish. So let me circle the green-colored fish and label them as favored. Now, if the population had been made up entirely of blue-colored fish, the population could have been wiped out. So you can see how genetic diversity is super important. Next up, we have species biodiversity. So this type of biodiversity describes the variety of species found in a particular area. So if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this video that the Amazon rainforest is home to over 3 million different species. This doesn't include only the animals, but also plants, fungi, and more. So the Amazon rainforest is an incredible example of species biodiversity. But what effect does species biodiversity have on an ecosystem? Well, when more roles are filled by different species in an ecosystem, more complex interactions can take place, making the ecosystem healthier. So I'll write here that more biodiversity equals a healthier ecosystem. The benefits of healthy ecosystems include clean air, sufficient pollination, fertile soil, and even better control of disease outbreaks. Finally, we have our broadest category, which is ecosystems biodiversity. So this kind of biodiversity describes the variety of ecosystems on Earth. So let's recall that an ecosystem consists of a community of living things and their physical environment. There exist all kinds of ecosystems on Earth, some of which include deserts, tropical rainforests, temperate grasslands, and even tundras, to name a few. And the reason why ecosystems are important is because they sustain human life in a variety of ways. So having ecosystem diversity is important to the survival of our species, the human species. Now, it's also important to note that biodiversity can change. For example, speciation increases biodiversity. Now, what is speciation? Well, speciation is a process by which one species evolves into two or more species over a long period of time. So on a larger scale, the immense biodiversity that we see on Earth is the result of repeated speciation events that have occurred over evolutionary time. So to give you an idea of what speciation looks like visually, I will draw a simple branching tree here, starting from the base of the tree, which is the common ancestor shared between different species, and extending to different branches, which are the various descendants from this common ancestor. And we can also see the progression of time here with this blue arrow signifying past events all the way up to recent events. Each branch point represents a speciation event, so the model shows a single ancestral species giving rise to 4 new species, or an increase in biodiversity. Now, on the flip side, extinction decreases biodiversity. So extinction is the process by which a species, population, or some other group of organisms completely dies off. So extinction can also decrease biodiversity at multiple levels. For example, if a population goes extinct, the genetic variants present in that population are no longer part of that species' gene pool. And if a species goes extinct, then that species' ecological niche is no longer fulfilled in an ecosystem. Unfortunately, extinctions are irreversible, resulting in a permanent loss of diversity from our planet. So, for example, you might have heard of the dodo bird, which is an example of a species that went extinct. So here's a picture of a dodo bird model. So the dodo bird was a flightless bird that unfortunately went extinct due to overhunting, competition with other species, and habitat loss. So sadly, the last dodo bird was reportedly killed in 1681. Now, you might be wondering too what effect we humans are having on Earth's biodiversity. Unfortunately, biodiversity is decreasing as a result of human actions. We can attribute this loss of biodiversity to many factors, including climate change, habitat destruction, and overexploitation of resources. In fact, the species extinction is now occurring at a rate 100 to 1,000 times faster than the background rate detected in the fossil record. This extinction rate is greater than the speciation rate, which leads to an overall loss of biodiversity. So I'll write here, less biodiversity. So today we learned about biodiversity, which is the variety of life present on Earth. Biodiversity can be found on genetic, species, and ecosystem levels, so 3 different levels. And we also learned that speciation increases biodiversity while extinction decreases biodiversity. And lastly, we know that currently human actions threaten biodiversity, causing a faster rate of extinction than rate of speciation.